the name of the values that keep you alive. Do not let your vision of man be distorted by the ugly, the cowardly, the mindless, and those who have never achieved his title. Do not lose your knowledge that man's proper estate is an upright posture, an intransigent mind, and a step that travels on limited roads. Do not let your fire go out. Spark might replace the spark, and the hopeless swamps of the approximate, the not quite, the not yet, the not at all. The world you desired can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It's yours.
Hello and welcome back to the Cryptoconomy podcast. I'm here with my partner, Enrique Sotomayor, and we are live in Austin at South by Southwest. Enrique, thank you for being here with us.
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah, so I guess we'll just start with a little bit about what you've seen so far, if there's anything that maybe sticks out to you, a little bit about what we've been doing here.
Yeah, it's like putting your head in the fire hose. Blockchain seems to be all the buzz this year at South by Southwest, and the first couple of days of South by are really focused on technology. So blockchain has been really all that you hear about.
Yeah. We've been to a couple events. So we went to the Crypto Summit. We went to the it was
the BYO Bitcoin event as well.
Yeah, last night they were featured in Business Insider. We know the CEO from a little while back, so we're talking to them. A lot of interesting companies. We went to a women's panel at the event prior to that. We heard from the CEO of Paragon. They're doing marijuana supply chain in Santa Monica, I believe. She had some interesting insights. A lot of them did things like marketing. So they were talking about how marketing is going to change now that there are new regulations as far as the classification of certain ICOs as securities. So within those regulations, you can't advertise something if it's a security, and there's certain terminology you can't use. You can't specify that someone's going to make money as a result of purchasing. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is the way they were talking about, they talked about how they needed to get across to people that these utility tokens were kind of different. But one of the ironies is, I think, if they have been the ones marketing a lot of these tokens, they've sort of been purposefully misleading people as to the fact that, you know, they're going to have value at some point. And just because I think a lot of people don't understand what they are, the price will increase, but there's really no economic reason for that, is there?
Right. Yeah, it seems like they're in a position to want to clarify whether the token that they're selling is a security or is a utility. And they seem to be saying it's a utility, but at the same time, insinuating that, hey, it's going to appreciate just like a security, though. They want all the pros without any of the cons.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the move to securities, I think, is good, at least because it's cut and dry. People know what they're getting. You can differentiate. And going forward, I think the more people educate themselves as to what these tokens actually are and what they mean, the more they'll, I think, be careful as to which ones they invest in, because, you know, the hedge funds, the guys who are putting big money in, they know the difference. They know what this is going to mean, you know, a year down the line. But people who are just anxious to get a piece of anything they can aren't necessarily going to know that these tokens might not have value.
Right, but they seem to be selling that as the pro of ICO. So they say, hey, like, you have a startup, if it goes the IPO route, that's only available to accredited investors. So part of the pro of launching an ICO is you get access to anybody in the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is a huge pro. I think what they need to do, though, is to differentiate, because it isn't like an IPO if it is just sort of a means of exchange and it's not a piece of a company. So when it does get regulated, or when, I think a lot of the tokens that you have seen so far, very few of them have been classified as securities. I think Science Blockchain was one of the first ones. It might have been the first one that actually went through the process. I believe it's Regulation D. So it's accredited investors only, whereas Regulation A, which was something passed under the Obama administration, opened some of these initial offerings up to people who weren't accredited investors. And I think not having accredited investors is great, because it's very hard to become an accredited investor. You need, I think, $250,000 a year in income. You need over $1 million in assets. So it opens up these equities markets to people who previously really didn't have an opportunity. And I think once things stabilize and once the information starts to get out, it's going to be a net positive for most people. And I think it'll be great once they start giving people who own pieces of these companies more of the rights that general shareholders do. So of things like voting rights, access to secondary markets where it's very easy to at least liquidate it. So sometimes the problem is you can buy a token and it's almost impossible to liquidate it, and you get kind of stuck with it, which is something that happened with, pump and dump schemes with penny stocks and things like that. So I'm hoping things are going in that direction. I've seen also a lot of VR. We've seen a lot of VR applications that mesh blockchain or cryptos with VR. So in-game payment systems in cryptocurrencies, which is something I think makes a lot of sense. Something we're kind of working on with our miners. We're trying to create a system that'll mine for you and allow you to play VR games, because a lot of the functionality in the hardware works both ways. So you can get access to both. And I think there are a lot of people creating software with those intentions in mind. So I'm hoping that going forward, we see a lot more value to consumers now that people are becoming more picky with what they invest in. You've seen fewer people putting money into ICOs more recently. So it's thinning out the herd, but I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, as long as people do the due diligence that the accredited investors tend to do, as long as they don't see this opportunity to invest in something that they might not have had the opportunity to invest in previously, then it'll be a good thing. I just don't want people to be like, oh, there's this new investment vehicle which previously wasn't available to me, and now I should just buy it because it's available. I think people should take their responsibility and do all the due diligence that an accredited investor might do. An ICO is just like any other investment. You really need to find out who's behind it. Just because they're throwing around buzzwords doesn't mean that you're going to get rich overnight.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of buzzwords, and that was something interesting about the event last night. And they actually kind of touched on that in the article. They talked about how everyone's going on stage and saying, this is like 1994, we're all going to be rich. A lot of people are doing this just as a get rich quick scheme, and a lot of these ICOs, that's exactly what happened. But by the time they get the money, their product has been invalidated by a competitor, or they have to pivot very quickly. And I think a lot of money is just sort of being thrown away, unfortunately. And that's a lot of the people who've risked money they might not have to lose necessarily. So there are any other insights? So Friday we did the startup crawl at the Capital Factory. We have an office on the 16th floor there, so we primarily work out of the Capital Factory. So it was nice getting to see people walking through, giving us some ideas as to, where some of this could be implemented. And you start to realize how global all this stuff is. You have people coming in from all over the world, investors from China. And, we had people specifically talking about blockchain marketing in China. So, it's a worldwide phenomenon, even though it might feel sort of local sometimes. And I think there are a lot of great companies here in Austin that are trying to capitalize on South by Southwest, trying to get the word out. Are there any specific companies or things that you can think of that stuck out?
I think Algebraics and Factom are the two biggest blockchain players here in Austin. I didn't get to go to the keynote speech by the Factom CEO because it was a badge-only event. But yeah, those are probably the two biggest players in the blockchain space here in Austin.
And yeah, I think Arcade City too, right?
Yeah, Arcade City has a very broad goal. Arcade City has a fascinating history as well. They came to be here in Austin right when Uber and Lyft got kicked out of the city. So the CEO, Christopher David, he's a very anarchist, very libertarian, and his philosophy, he's primarily driven by his philosophy, not by a desire to monetize his ideas. His philosophy is, hey, 100% what the rider pays should go to the driver. And so they launched this way back in the day when Uber and Lyft got kicked out of Austin, but they didn't have their TNC regulatory stuff in order, so they got shut down. I think Chris actually got arrested. Yeah, it was in the Capitol factory, ironically enough. He was working out of there, and the cops came.
If one of your founders hasn't been arrested, you're probably not doing something right.
Right. And then a year after that, they decided, hey, a blockchain is the perfect infrastructure for us to build our business on. We could actually, through tokens, incentivize people to use our network as opposed to an Uber or Lyft, and do it in a way where the rider pays less and the driver earns more. So that's their main philosophy, but they're much broader than ride sharing. They want to be the general service economy. So they want the Airbnb, the Instacart, all that to happen on their blockchain.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's like turning your city into a co-op is how I'd kind of describe it. So everyone is, it's almost like a bartering system, but, you know, not pure bartering because it is a tokenization, but you are, you know, trading services with your neighbors. You're trying to create this community around the city, give people certain perks for being essentially a good citizen.
Right. That's the key, that the token is the perk. The token is the reward. The token isn't how you pay for the ride. It could be if you want to, but you could pay with cash. You could pay with Venmo. You could pay just like an Uber with your credit card. But the token is the reward you get for using this network instead of something else.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think we're seeing that more and more people are trying to create these communities where everyone's helping each other out. So you don't need to go to, you know, some big business to get something done. You know, companies like Fiverr have proven that there's a huge market for people who just want to, you know, help each other out and create these little part-time jobs that are, you know, fairly easy to sign up for, where whatever skills you have, you can market them directly to people. We've been working on our own blockchain, and our website will be up soon with, you know, some of those ideas sort of running in the background, and also attempting to sort of log some of the data that's on the internet to create sort of what you might call like a blockchain wayback machine, which I think is really interesting because you'll see a lot of these big tech companies, someone will put out a tweet and it'll be gone in a matter of hours, scrubbed from the record. Or, you know, there were a couple bad pictures of Beyonce back in the day and they scrubbed the internet, or Kim K will have, you know, a certain picture, and it's crazy how they can essentially erase history.
Yep. You could just imagine, like, when Bezos bought the Washington Post, like any anti-Amazon article probably disappeared from their website.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he bought it. It certainly wasn't profitable. They were hemorrhaging money, which is why they sold it in the first place. So I think it's important to look at these companies where you think, oh, you know, where are they making money? How is Twitter making money? Just because they have users doesn't mean they are making money, and it doesn't mean they're a good investment unless they're offering someone another service. And I think that's it's important to remember that these companies are not necessarily just trying to make money. There are often investors who want something different. And sort of as a segue, I think a lot of people we've seen have either worked at big tech companies in the past, or they currently do. And we've seen a lot of censorship, a lot of people getting pushed out, a lot of smart people with independent ideas. They don't like to talk about it. It's very hush hush. But there's a lot of talent out there and a lot of people who are getting pushed out, and the people who end up staying are the ones who are trying to create the internet in whatever image they have. I know AT&T recently pushed out an internet bill of rights, which I think is sort of an interesting concept. I think it's something Trump is sort of trying to push internally through the people he knows at AT&T. And I think he recognizes that there is some collusion on behalf of these companies to support certain things and not others.
Yeah, I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. And there's no rational argument for censorship of ideas, censorship of violent content, things like that. You can potentially make an argument for, but censorship of ideas, if an idea is truly dangerous, the best thing you can do is expose that idea and avoid having that idea be passed on to the next generation. If you censor it, then you're just feeding it.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the internet is you have all of this information at everyone's fingertips for the first time in history. So you have people from all over the world communicating, and, you know, it's created this massive democratization of information, but that's only going to be the case so long as these companies don't censor it and they don't decide, what information is important. I think most news, of course, there's some bias in the reporting, but the overwhelming bias comes at the editor level where they're choosing which stories to run at all. So
Right.
there are a lot of things you never hear about, and you don't know they happen.
Yeah, there's this tendency to no longer report objective facts, but actually report narrative. So the news is supposed to give us facts, and then the public is supposed to form a narrative. But now the news reports will say, "Hey, the overwhelming majority of people are upset with this," or Twitter will have a Twitter moment that says, "The internet was pissed off when Trump did this." Well, like, that's your explanation of how we responded. That's not objective facts. So that's very manipulative. Very. It's not a coincidence that they're avoiding the facts and going with a narrative, because it helps. It's easier to shape and mold and fit in with your own incentives.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I think that really started to happen was when you'd start seeing news stories and the story would just be a picture of a tweet. It would be a picture of Trump's tweet, and that was the news story. And it's like, well, why do I have to, tune into CNN to read a tweet? I can follow Trump on Twitter. So you start to realize the news isn't about reporting about information necessarily. It's about giving opinions on the information that's presented or spinning it in a certain
Telling
way.
you what opinion you should have based on these facts. Telling you what the rational man concludes after reading these facts to make you feel irrational if you do not agree.
And it's just a survival instinct. A lot of the reasons why we gravitate towards like-minded people is we want to fit in within whatever culture we're in. So a lot of people are virtue signaling because it makes more sense to agree or convince yourself to agree with a position that you might in the back of your mind not completely agree with than to come out against this collective that you're then going to have to actively fight against, that is going to be more work than it's worth. So it takes some audacity to take a stand, and a lot of people get picked off as a result, which is unfortunate, but those are the people you should be paying attention to. You're going to hear from, I would encourage people, if, for example, Southern Poverty Law Center has put someone on their list of, racists or sexists, I would think about just looking at that list and then listening to a podcast by one of those people. There are a lot of people who are on there, and you listen to them talk, and it's sort of scary because you realize this person is not a racist, they're not a sexist, they're not crazy, and yet you're made to believe that. And so you think, well, what else am I made to believe that's blatantly not true and I just haven't looked into? Because a lot of times they're assuming you're just not going to do your own research, and most people just don't have time to, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, so all these things are interrelated. It's not a coincidence that they came at the same time. The service economies boomed right as Uber, Lyft, all these things came to be in 2013-ish. Well, from 2009 to 2013, and then the blockchain came to be, and now this push of censorship-resistant technology and censorship-resistant infrastructure. All these things are connected. They're not random coincidences. I think primarily the surge of the service economy showed how much value there is in transacting at the peer-to-peer level. And then we started to see, hey, there's this big fat middleman taking 35% every time. Why don't we work together and cut him out and just pay each other more? And that was where the blockchain came up. And then then we started highlighting, hey, some of the biggest pros of the blockchain are this immutability, this censorship resistant decentralized infrastructure. Now that's the next wave. That's building infrastructure, not just for apps, not just for technology, but maybe for political. I saw Sierra Leone just had an election in Africa and they used blockchain technologies to ensure the validity of their voting. Now I see an opportunity for Mexico to do that with their election coming up in a couple months. There's all these aren't like random events. Yeah. It's all one event, and once you see that, you can see it's easier to predict the trajectory of the progress.
Yeah, I mean, when even Putin is putting in blockchain voting, I think there's something to be said about that. And I think the U.S. is way behind most of the the industrialized world as far as technology and government go. A lot of these countries, especially smaller countries, it's a lot easier to implement fairly quickly. Even on the city level, a lot of cities are doing it. I think one of the best ways to do it might be to start at maybe the district level, use it as sort of a test case so that people can see that it works. You can look at how I think voter turnout rates would significantly improve if you made the voting process easier. You put it on a phone with
that's
facial
actually
ID.
something Elon Musk was talking about here in Austin. He was talking about his idea, his vision for the government on Mars, his vision of a direct democracy. And he explained how back in the day, a representative democracy made a lot of sense because maybe not everybody was literate. Maybe not everybody had the potential to have an opinion in all these domains. But now as education becomes more and more common, it makes a lot of sense to let every individual who is impacted by the decision have a say. And another big point he made is he wants the laws on Mars to be easier to take down than to put up. So I think the numbers he put up were it would take 60% of people to agree on something to make something a law, but it would take only 40% of people to want it to come down for it to fall.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and he also implied that there would be like expiration dates for these laws. You can't just have a law that's indefinite and has an infinite lifespan. You have to clearly define what the purpose of the law is, and once you clearly define that, within that definition, there is an expiration date.
Yeah, I mean, so many of the laws that we have, they've just been sort of grandfathered in. It's the way it's always been. All the way back to laws about hemp. Hemp is it was the plastic industry for the most part that put out all of this propaganda about reefer madness, and for 100 years that's impacted the entire governance, a number of people that have been thrown in jail as a result of, a simple marketing campaign. And a lot of these things, they're never revisited. So the idea is always more law. It's to fix the problems that laws have created. It's not less law as a mechanism of just turning the clock back and going back to the way things were when things were working better.
Right. I guess the logic for more and more laws would be like, hey, the more rights we have, the more meaning we can find in our lives. Let's just try to get more and more rights. So let's instantiate rights by adding more and more laws. And I think something to...
Yeah, I think those are antithetical. I think rights and laws are, the more laws you have, typically the less rights you have. And it's pretty much impossible to follow all the laws that we have on the books now. You commit like 3 felonies a day on average. And that's if you're a fairly law-abiding citizen. And so we've created this system where it's very hard to stay above the law, and the people who can stay above the law have the resources to do so. An article I was reading today that was interesting was talking about how the ultra wealthy have been heavily investing in nuclear bunkers. So they've created these almost Disneyland-like country clubs where billionaires can pay, tens of millions of dollars to rent a space, and they are entirely solar paneled. They're stocked with 10 years of food. They have golf courses and pools and full militias in case there are any sort of uprisings or roving gangs. And so that begs the question, what happens to everyone else? And also, are they preparing for something that, everyone else doesn't know about, which is, totally possible. Things like solar flares. They're anticipating a solar flare. They were at least sometime later in this week. The NOAA has put out something saying that these reports aren't necessarily true, but the Russian Space Agency seems to think so. And there's, widespread consensus that if you hit what is considered to be a level 5 solar flare, all the satellites will be knocked out of orbit. Our power grids will be offline for over a year. And if you're living in a really big city, you're going to have a lot of people competing for very scarce resources, which, can go very badly very quickly. And that's something a lot of the people who talk about gun rights and things like that, I don't think they're necessarily thinking about what could happen in that case. It's not that we necessarily need them now. It's possible that they aren't they aren't a net positive for our society in the present. Maybe more people are getting killed by them. Maybe that's not okay with people, but people are also assuming that the current conditions are going to go on forever. We're going to have this stable society. And I think once you lose guns, they don't come back. And so then in a case where something like that happens, the only people with guns are going to be the people who are knocking on your door, trying to take your stuff, trying to, to survive, really.
Yeah, the tendency, all these doomsday preppers, the tendency to predict apocalypses or end of times. That'll be prevalent. That will always exist. If you look at the 20th century, we had 3 big opportunities where like the world might have ended: the First World War, the Second World War, and then the Cold War. So it's not irrational to think there's likely to be another scenario like that this century. But
I think it is fairly likely if you look at how many different things can happen. So it's, NASA has just put out a plan to nuke meteorites in case they get too close, or the Yellowstone supervolcano, if that erupts, we're going to have a year of soot in the atmosphere. Yes, I think it's easy to say doomsday preppers are sort of a nutty bunch, and I can understand why a lot of people would think that, but you should also realize that there are a lot of freak things that can happen.
Yeah, but if any of these freak things occur, what is the probability that your prepping will help you at all? It rounds down to 0.
Yeah. That can be true as well. You might want to be one of the ones taken out in the catastrophe because things will be so bad afterwards. But kind of like you said, if it did happen, well, you get to rebuild the world in your image. So you want a couple people around who know what they're doing, just for the sake of mankind. And it seems like that's what Musk is trying to do on Mars, almost as a failsafe. He's even talked about that.
Yeah, it makes sense to make our species interplanetary, because eventually something will happen on Earth, whether humans caused it, whether nature, whether whatever. Eventually, undoubtedly something will happen on Earth. So we have to be interplanetary if we want our species to survive.
Yeah, eventually the sun will burn out. There are inevitable things that will happen. Of course, that's billions of years down the line. But we're very rapidly progressing in our technological capabilities. So in the coming 100 years, who knows where we'll be? And if that's a billion years off, who knows where we'll be in a million years? I can't even imagine, provided we don't knock ourselves out. I've been seeing a lot of stuff too about things like viruses. They've been concerned about certain flus coming over from places like Australia. I think it's surprising that we haven't had a big, epidemic. I think the CDC has probably done a really good job in that respect. But things to keep in mind. I think it's important to always realize, just because something seems so improbable doesn't mean it's impossible. And we like to push a lot of these things to the back of our minds in the day-to-day, but at the very least, I think having, stock of water and some food is probably a good idea, because we're so reliant on the infrastructure of society.
Well, I guess now would be a bad time to be a doomsday prepper with all the news of Korean denuclearization on the horizon. It might be looking like their investments may not come to fruition.
Well, yeah, but they do drive up prices. I remember when swine flu was around, they were selling hazmat suits, and they were selling them, 500% over MSRP, and they were selling out. So when you do freak people out, you can sell a lot of stuff. So sometimes it's good. If anything, things like ammunition as well, I think are good. But I think that's, enough of that. So we can pivot a little bit. I think, something might be interesting to talk about. I've heard there's been a lot of stuff in the media about Russia and about whether or not Putin was responsible for the DNC hacking and a lot of the social media stuff. There was a Megyn Kelly interview where she's trying to grill him with all these gotcha questions, and he's getting incredibly frustrated with her. I think people in the media don't realize how easy it would actually be to, one, spoof a cyber attack from Russia. So the CIA, the NSA, most other intelligence agencies like the MI6 have software that Snowden, I believe, actually leaked, can easily spoof the signatures of other agencies. And also,
But most of the coordination with Russian agencies that they're citing isn't even that. It's not even at that level. They're just like, oh, look, people on 4chan were posting something, and their flag is the Russian flag, which you can pick.
Yeah.
So that's all the coordination that they're citing.
Yeah, and I think they're grouping a lot of real people in with these trolls. There's a lot of, real unhappiness. There were a lot of real people who are trying to express frustration over Twitter, and a lot of those people are getting kicked off the platform, being accused of Russian trolls. So there's almost this pushback that's pushing into real people's lives. And I think
it's been dragged on long enough for people to realize Russia is just a boogeyman buzzword that they're using. Like if you look at what Pelosi said when Rex Tillerson was nominated for Secretary of State, and then what she said today when he was fired for Secretary of State, both times she says, so when he was first nominated, she says, choosing an oil executive friendly with Vladimir Putin as Secretary of State sends a disturbing signal about the president-elect's priorities. And then when he was fired, she said, Secretary Tillerson's firing sets a profoundly disturbing precedent in which standing up for our allies against Russian aggression is grounds for humiliating dismissal. So either way, you lose, according to the Democrats. Either way, you're a Russian.
Well, the irony, too, is they're making Russia much more successful by talking about it all the time. So, they never could have been this successful if the mainstream media wasn't picking up on this stuff and talking about, how they were colluding. If his goal was to, fragment American society, they've succeeded with incredible returns for a very small investment when you think about it.
For $25,000 on Facebook ads that Facebook gladly took, by the way. They never returned it.
Yeah, I think you talk about campaign contribution laws. Facebook is a very gray area, and they've allowed this to happen and then acted like it's not their fault. And I think they're only frustrated because Hillary lost. I think if those contributions had been going the other way, they wouldn't have been worried about it at all. And I think it's also interesting to see, the things that they were doing, setting up all these events and trying to ruffle people's feathers. None of this was really crazy spycraft or, hardcore hacking. They always fail to recognize the fact that, firstly, the hacks exposed very real scandals within Hillary's emails. I mean, if you go through and actually read those emails, you realize the sort of person she was, the sort of campaign she was running, how she felt about other people, the way she talked about them. They won't throw screenshots of her emails on the news very often. So if you actually go through the WikiLeaks and read them, it's interesting to see how she felt about people, and a lot of the things she's implicated in seem to be very obvious from things like that. And I think in a lot of ways, Russia might have been trying to do us a favor. So if you think about the fact that she was for a no-fly zone in Syria, that's going to be a war with Russia. So maybe Russia just didn't want World War III. Maybe they were trying to save the world. Wouldn't that be crazy if Vladimir Putin actually cared about, the fabric of society and about the world, and he saw this as a net evil, whether he's wrong or right in your opinion.
I think every journalist should be forced to watch the Putin interviews on Showtime before writing any piece claiming to know anything about Putin's motives.
Yeah, I think most people have never seen him speak. They have no idea what he stands for. But if you look at he says it so explicitly. He says, we just don't want to be coerced by the outside world. The Russian people have their culture. We have our laws, and we're going to abide by those laws. He always says, if a Russian has violated Russian law, we will prosecute them. And, they never have. It's not illegal to troll someone in America, according to Russian law. And I hope it never is in America. It's becoming that way in places like the UK, where people are getting arrested or turned away at the border for things they say online. But Putin this really all started in the early 2000s when we started putting up anti-missile defense systems all around Russia's border in places like Turkey. And interestingly enough, this is sort of a tangent, but as far as America's commitment to truth, I'm an Armenian, and America has neglected to recognize the Armenian genocide because the Turks will refuse to allow us to put bases in their country if we recognize the Armenian genocide, which is a historical fact where millions of Armenians were killed in the early 1900s. This was not that long before the Holocaust, and that was actually something Hitler alluded to. He said, they asked, how do you think history will remember you? And he says, well, how does history remember the Armenian genocide? And the implication was it doesn't. People largely ignore it because it's an inconvenient truth. And so with Russia, they want to do their own thing. We assume that they want our democracy, they want our model, but he's proven maybe our model isn't the best model, and it certainly probably isn't right for the Russian people.
And just the concept of like, hey, if America's losing, that necessarily means that Russia's doing something bad. That's such a zero-sum way of looking at the world. The Democrats pride themselves on their openness and their global vision and their progressive values. But if you think that if the U.S. loses, that means Russia won, that you're just automatically defining the world to be zero-sum. You can't create value in your world. And in your world, if they win, we lose. So that's a very closed-minded way of looking at it. It's not, you shouldn't look at citizens of any other country as your natural enemy. How is it that we can openly hate citizens of another country? Why is it that our overlords in Hollywood make that all right? And why Russia particularly? How much of a threat do they really pose on us that they want us to hate them for no reason?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate because, the Russian people are great people. They're hardworking. They have a lot of American values when you really think about it. And a lot of the values we're trying to push on them aren't really American values to begin with.
And like looking at blockchain, looking at cryptography, looking at math and software development, some of the greatest breakthroughs come from Russian mathematicians, Russian cryptographers.
Our entire space program essentially was built on the backs of Germans and Russian scientists. So, we don't necessarily have the best of everything, and we do a lot better when we're collaborating. And so I think there's been an active push to keep Russia in a position where they don't have a lot of power, so they don't get to a point. People probably worry about a resurgence of some sort of Soviet Union type state. And I don't think that's right. I think you can allow the Russian state to succeed, and that's going to be better for everyone because they're not going to be desperate. The last thing you want is a desperate opponent with nuclear weapons. So you want them to be living a good life with a lot of trade. You want them to be engaging in the same things as we are. That's the best way to create a safe world, is create a world that people aren't so miserable in that nuclear war seems like an option. You want them to be enjoying the quality of life that they might have.
Yeah, so this year we had the Olympics in South Korea, and now the World Cup begins in June in Russia. So it's interesting how the Olympics were able to lay the foundation for maybe some diplomatic meetings and maybe help bring both Koreas to the table. And we'll see how much the World Cup can help resolve some global tensions amongst Russia and some of its neighbors, or maybe America.
Yeah. And Putin was one of the only people also to refuse the central banking system. He pushed a lot of the central banks out. I think he recognizes that there were a lot of bad deals out there that a lot of politicians are agreeing to for some insidious reasons. So I'm hoping that things get better. And I think as far as technology goes, places like Russia and North Korea, if Trump brokers a deal with North Korea, I think you can see a lot of advancement happening there very quickly. A lot of South Korean tech pouring in, a lot of collaboration. A lot of if they simply decide to rebuild the state on the basis of things like cryptocurrencies and blockchain, they can essentially start from scratch. And I think that would be one of the best ways to create a huge influx of resources into their economy and get a lot of investment, foreign investment. I know Switzerland recently declared themselves a crypto nation. We talked to a representative from Switzerland while we were here, and it makes a lot of sense because Switzerland is the banking capital of the world. So cryptos actually represent probably the biggest risk to the status quo in a place like Switzerland.
Yeah, some of the biggest value of Bitcoin is or maybe not Bitcoin specifically, but just these cryptocurrencies is the ability to use banking infrastructure, but exist outside of the bank's ecosystem. So I could hold my money, but it's not accessible to Chase, JP Morgan, all these players, and I could grow my assets outside of their ecosystem. So that's part of the real value of these crypto assets. And countries like Switzerland see an opportunity for maybe it's something analogous to like the Cayman Islands of cryptocurrencies, a nation that's super friendly towards this business model that helps drive a lot of entity formation in that nation, specifically because of the friendly laws.
Yeah, right now a lot of cryptocurrency companies, a lot of ICOs are launching out of places like Gibraltar. I've been to Gibraltar. It's essentially just a rock in that separates Europe and the Mediterranean from Africa. So there's really nothing there. But by simply opening business up to all these cryptocurrency companies, they're seeing a huge influx of foreign investment. You've seen that in places like Panama, for example. You would think Panama is not, you would assume that Panama is very different from what it actually is. And what it actually is essentially a place sort of like Puerto Rico, or it was until we handed it back and gave them their sovereignty after building the canal. But they've done really well because of lax regulations. They've had a lot of medical research come in, things like stem cell research. You have these buildings that are 100 stories high that are filled with medical offices. So at the end of the day, freedom, I think, is the best way to attract foreign investment and jumpstart an economy so that everyone is doing better. And you can, if you do want a socialized state, one of the best things you can do is attract businesses who can help subsidize a lot of the costs of some of these programs. So in Denmark, you have a 25% tax, a VAT tax on essentially all products. So it's fairly high. But the business tax rate is only 20%. So the business tax rate was significantly lower than the United States. And that's one of the reasons why they can fund so many of these programs, because they can attract a lot of these outside businesses, a lot of consulting companies.
So you want freedom, but you don't want the Wild West. So that's sort of where we're at in the crypto world right now. There's no regulation at all. And every single department every branch of the federal, or every department, of the federal government seems to see money in a different light. So like, money is everything in their opinion. It's a security, it's a commodity, it's a currency, depending what branch of the government you ask. So once we start getting more and more regulation and clearly define the sectors of this new environment, I think it'll be better than just the Wild West, like all freedom, no regulation. A lot of individuals are susceptible to make bad investments just because of the fact there are no regulations. So I think I see weeding out scams, just like pulling weeds from a garden. You're left with a cleaner garden at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think the idea of money is changing too, especially in the minds of younger people who haven't really grown up in a cash economy. So, money is just numbers on a screen to us anyway. It's, our Chase banking app and the numbers that are there. So it's not that big of a stretch to say that money is,
right. But an interesting point to make is that cash use is at an all-time high. Since I think it's 1983, there hasn't been that much, or the amount of transactions done in cash are higher than they have been since 1983. So we are moving towards a digital cash, but regular cash it's not zero sum. It's not blockchain or the dollar. I see a world where both can exist and serve different purposes.
So why do you think there's been so much of a cash economy?
I think it has to do a lot with these service economies. So with the introduction of like barter-like systems for stuff, cash is a frictionless means of transaction, and also because people don't want they don't want every single one of their transactions logged and stuff. And there's also a greater sense of security than there ever has been. So you can sit on cash, and it's not as much of a risk as it previously was.
Yeah, like bank robberies are no longer really a threat. There hasn't been as much of an issue with crime in that respect.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely the way we're going. Do you think if cryptos were to take over on a global scale, do you think there would be a lot more cooperation between countries because you'd have to collaborate more on trade? There wouldn't be, a country like the U.S., pushing the dollar through things like OPEC, and it
Yeah.
might.
Yeah, I do see. Okay, so I think a lot of like the reasons why we see ourselves as natural enemies with other countries are because of monetary policy. So OPEC, all oil things are priced in the U.S. dollars. That affects a lot of other countries, and if we lose the pricing in U.S. dollars, that will negatively affect the American, uh, what's called economy. So the monetary policy arm of the government has a lot of effects. So as it starts losing its power to pull this lever, I think we will no longer be. We will be a lot more collaborative instead of competitive with these countries. Competition is good, but collaboration is even better.
Yeah, you can if you have more brains working on the same problems, it's going to be better for everyone. Crowdsource all of these things just the same way you should crowdsource legislation and bills and ideas for government. You should crowdsource ideas for business, crowdsource ideas for technology and research with other countries. And so the more people we get on board, I think the better, the faster we're going to innovate. But that being said, I don't think you want a system where countries don't exist at all. I think it's important to have a commonality of culture, commonality of ideals, and also have the option, if you don't like those ideals, to move somewhere where they fit more with, how you feel. So, if one of the major issues with that is things like social programs. So because people pay so much into a system with taxes, their citizenship is worth something, which means not all citizenship is created equal.
But maybe they can pay into these social programs outside of the state. Maybe you could have like a private Medicare where you pay in, and whenever you reach a certain or private Social Security or whatever, any sort of social thing, it doesn't have to be done by the state.
Yeah,
the state didn't invent money. The state didn't invent crowdsourcing. The state just took a monopoly on the purse, and I think this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the breaking of that monopoly.
Yeah, and one option I read about last night is even putting citizenship up for auction. So say you didn't have a retirement and you wanted to move to Mexico, you could sell your U.S. citizenship to someone who is desperate to come in, and that could be your retirement. So if you use the markets to determine a lot of this stuff, you can make the system better for everyone.
Yeah, blockchain, we're barely scratching the surface. It's like we just invented the Ethernet, and we're being asked to predict what apps will be like. It's impossible to make these leaps, but I definitely think blockchain will be just as disruptive as the internet was. It's the new wave.
So I guess maybe one thing we can do is sort of go into some of the economics and some of the basics. So if someone had no idea what blockchain was, what would you tell them?
The simple explanation is that it's a collection of Excel sheets that are all linked together. That if I make one change, you see that change, and all these changes are transparent. So the fancy way of wording that is that it's a distributed ledger. It's a system of accounts that's not centralized in one place. It's distributed across everybody who's using it. But we each know what transactions have been made and who owns what.
Okay. So as far as types, so like people I'm sure have heard of like proof of work, proof of stake. What's your opinion on all these different ways of getting there and which ones we want to be looking out for? And
right. Yeah, I'm fascinated. I think it's fascinating to live at a time where we can test economic theories and software at scale and figure out which ones are actually viable economic theories and which ones are maybe a little too optimistic. It's really hard to tell proof of stake versus proof of work, like which one I believe in more in the long term. I do see a lot of pros to proof of work. So some of the pros I see are the energy consumption. Everybody tries to sell that as a bad thing. Look how much energy it costs to move one Bitcoin. It's not like it's free to move $1. The government burns all these resources to enable this transaction to be the trust that backs this dollar. So the proof of work, the energy consumption it's like a thermodynamic bound on how much energy do I have to spend to push a false transaction, to break your perfect thing. So there's a physical cost to it. So on that angle, that's why I'm kind of a pro of proof of work. But proof of stake is very, very utopian, in my opinion. It's very I don't know if they can get it to work. If Vitalik can get it to work, I think it will be one of the greatest accomplishments of the century. But there are potentials for being classified as a security if you have a proof of sale or proof of stake consensus algorithm, because you are alluding to potential future earnings. You're saying, hey, you own this much Ethereum, you could just use something and earn interest. So it's a lot more. It'll be harder to make the argument that you're not a security if from your consensus algorithm there is built-in profit.
Yeah. So I mean, I think kind of one way to think about it would be mining is like crowdsourcing the automation and validation of, just basic processes. So instead of having a bank where at every step of the process someone needs to sign off, someone needs to follow the money trail, they need to submit this paperwork to go there, they need to go over the waiting period, so there are settlement periods. That's something I'm going to be talking about with John Koval in a week or so. So that's something that takes up a lot of people's time, especially in governments and bureaucracies. A lot of time, money, and energy is spent just doing these basic processes that we've essentially not only figured out a way to automate, but also found a way to incentivize. So the mining method ensures that people who do invest in supporting the networks are rewarded proportionally for their efforts. So, I mean, everyone wins. The economics are sound enough to get cryptos to the point where they are now. There have been, for people who are just getting into cryptos, a lot of people are very doom and gloom about it. But, we've been around since 2013 and the Mt. Gox days, and the fact that there have been so many times when the future was so bleak, and somehow the network has survived, and the people at the heart of all of this have pushed it forward. And the reason is because it's simply better than than all the alternatives that we have right now.
Yeah, it's a simple mathematical equation. Like you can condense all of Bitcoin to a series of mathematical equations, and you can't condense the whole Fed to that. There's a lot of human elements within our current economic infrastructure. We depend a lot on signaling, on animal spirits, on a lot of things that we can't quantify. And Bitcoin is agnostic to all these things. Bitcoin is simply a Bitcoin, proof of work was the consensus algorithm used in Bitcoin. But Bitcoin isn't the only one. We could have a proof of stake world, or we could have a world where we have blockchains that use proof of stake and proof of work. It's not one or the other necessarily, but I really don't see that big of a con for proof of work to put so much effort, so much of the world's best talent to brainstorm an alternative to it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So maybe to wrap this up, I think it'd be interesting to ask you, what do you think we'll be seeing next year at South by Southwest? What do you think, the major tenets are? Do you think VR is going to make, leaps and bounds? Do you think a lot more people are going to adopt things like that? Do you think cryptos are going to be front and center? Do you think AI will be front and center, something out of left field we might not be thinking about?
Yeah, okay, my prediction is that we're going to add so much value to our world because of these technologies that we're discovering of blockchain and stuff, that we're going to look for ways to apply these technologies for social good. So I see next year as maybe the buzzwords might still be blockchain and AI, maybe VR, maybe not, but a way to use blockchain to provide value to people who live outside of the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I see a lot of right now we're just seeing novelties done through blockchain, but as it matures, I think we're going to move towards social good more than novelties.
Yeah, and I think that's fairly natural. Right now it's just in the development stage. It's figuring out what we can do with this stuff, how we can best do it in isolated cases. And then once we've figured out that package, we can start copy pasting that to different places and, experimenting within real governments, within real countries, and see, what the effects are. And I think it's going to say a lot about, the effectiveness of, laissez-faire economies where you just give people the opportunity to function within the economy the way they would like to without the government necessarily interfering. And in places like Venezuela, that's already helping the people fairly significantly.
Yeah. So my predictions would be blockchain remains a prevalent buzzword, and that somehow we manage to use blockchain, use some of the tech that comes out of Bitcoin to solve some of the resource sharing problems that we have in the world. So those would be my predictions.
Awesome. Well, we'll be back next time with a new podcast. We'll have John Koval on in about a week. We have several other guests we're trying to line up while we're here at South by Southwest. So once we finalize those, we'll let you know. We're finalizing work on our first app, Atlas. We should have our new website, Cryptoconomy.world, up with our blockchain and some previews to some of the other stuff we're working on. So it's exciting times, and we'll catch up with you guys next time.